Next week we'll begin, it was requested, a study of a workbook on personal evangelism. The first two lessons, I haven't had time to bind that material together. That's a book by Benjamin Lee called It Is Not Rocket Science. And you can see the lessons listed there on the front, the first two. We will, I'll get those bound, hopefully copied, and get some comb binders and get the full book bound this week. But so you can go ahead and have the opportunity to read through that. The first few lessons two lessons are on the board, are on the thing in the back. And so pick those up and prepare for our study here over the next few weeks. We are in the book of Proverbs, and since this is our last time in the study of the book of Proverbs, I thought that we might review very briefly some of the things that we have learned thus far, and that we would be reminded of what the book of Proverbs is all about. The key verse in the book of Proverbs is that wisdom is the principal thing. Therefore, what should we do? Get wisdom. Above all else, we need to get wisdom and we need to get understanding. You might also identify Proverbs 1 and 7, the fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge, but fools despise wisdom and instruction. And so fear of God is the starting point for all wisdom. How do we define wisdom in the very beginning of our study? Wisdom is, as Harkwriter says, seeing things from God's point of view. In other words, when I'm wise, I'm seeing things as God sees them, not as man thinks, not as I perceive to be the wisest course, but I'm looking at things from God's perspective. To look at it in another way, wisdom is the skill to put knowledge into practice. In fact, the word that is translated wisdom is sometimes translated skill. You know, just because somebody has the knowledge to do something doesn't mean they have the skill to actually do it. And wisdom is that ability to take God's knowledge and then to translate it over in our day-to-day lives. We've said the book of Proverbs, as we outlined it, easily falls into two sections. Proverbs 1 through Proverbs 9 and verse 18 is Solomon on wisdom's value. What will wisdom do for us? Why do we need that wisdom? It also presents the counterpoint to that. That is folly, who calls for us to listen to her, but wisdom has far more value. And then in 10 to 31, we have these various proverbs of Solomon, of the wise men, those collected in the days of Hezekiah, the words of Agur, the words of Lemuel, and then, of course, also included in the words of Lemuel is the virtuous woman. Lesson Maker defines it this way: words for the young, words for everyone, and words for leaders. A little simplified, but it does help a little bit to understand the content of Proverbs. So when we get into chapter 31, we are introduced here to a man by the name of King Lemuel. Who is King Lemuel? We don't know. Some think he's Solomon. I question whether there's much evidence for that at all. The word Lemuel means unto God. And I really don't understand why it would be that Solomon in the book of Proverbs would talk about Proverbs in chapters 1 to 9, Proverbs in 10 through 29, and then in 30 and 31 take on a different persona like Agur and Lemuel, which is what many think he's doing. So it seems to me this is probably a king that is unknown otherwise. He may have been the king over just a city. You know, we think about a king being a monarch, but oftentimes kings would have ruled over maybe just a walled city, a small place. And this may be a king that is over a smaller area who is not recorded in reference to other places in the Bible or in secular history. The chapter easily divides itself into two sections. I'm going to come back to that 1 through 9 in a minute. There's motherly advice in 1 to 9, and then the virtuous woman in 10 through the end of the chapter. Now, there are two approaches that are taken to Proverbs 31. There are some that see this as two completely disjointed sections. In other words, there's motherly advice, and now there's the section on the virtuous woman, and they're completely disconnected from one another. Dan King, in his commentary, argues at some length, and you can go and read that on your own, that there is a connection between these two sections. I think the easiest connection you see, by the way, is in the fact that in 1 to 9, the mother advises Lemuel, don't let women lead you astray. Choose the right kind of woman, if you will. And then in 10 through the rest of the chapter, it's as if she comes back and says, when I talk about women, this is the kind of woman what? That you're looking for. This is the kind of woman that you want to marry. So that seems to be the obvious connection that is drawn between these, is the instruction about women in verse 3 and what they can destroy, how they can destroy you. But then to come back in chapter 10 and say, but there are, in verse 10, there are women that are actually what? A blessing. And this is the kind of wife that you want to choose. And so I see these as two connected sections as opposed to disjointed as some see that. So this first section, Lemuel says that this is what his mother taught him. And so he's recalling this motherly advice, if you will, that has been presented to him by his mother. Some believe, by the way, that Lemuel is struggling with the kind of things that are talked about. Women, alcohol, justice as king. And his mother is saying to him, in essence, in verse 2, what, my son, what are you thinking? Why are you acting that way? This is not a way a king needs to act. In fact, here's how a king should behave. And so it may well be that he's already struggling as a young man along these lines, and his mother's coming to him and saying, son, this is not what I expect out of you. Don't live this way. In fact, when she calls him the son of my womb and the son of my vows, some interpret that to mean that my son, the answer to my prayers. The CEV translates it, my son Lemuel, you were born in answer to my prayers. Listen to me carefully. Maybe much like Hannah, that she had spent time asking for a child, and now she's been blessed with that child. And she's saying, listen, God gave you to me. I'm trying to give you what? Good instruction and good advice. Listen to what I am telling you. Listen to my instruction. So, as they listen to the instruction, the first thing she says is, do not give your strength to women or to that which destroys the king. What impact could a woman have upon a king's life? Give me some, let me reword that this way. Give me some examples in Scripture of kings that were destroyed by women. Who can you think of? Solomon, 1 Kings chapter 11. Now, it was when he was old that his wives turned away his hearts after other gods. Here's a man that in spite of God's instructions, in spite of all of his wisdom that he had, he chose poorly in the number of people he married and in the quality of people that he married. And he married the daughters of a foreign god. And what happened? They turned away his heart after other gods. And really everything that sort of transpires after that, the dividing of the kingdom, that all results from Solomon's giving his strength to women. I think about other cases in the Scriptures. You remember when Jehoshaphat, who is a good king, but he's a good king what? But he made an alliance with King Ahab. It's one of those, you ever know in friendship and you think, what draws these two people together? And Ahab is one of the most wicked kings that there ever was in the nation of Israel. Did more than all that went before him to lead Israel astray. Formed an alliance with Jehoshaphat, and in order to ratify that alliance, what did Ahab do? You remember? He gave his daughter, you remember her name? The grandmother of the year, Athaliah. Athaliah was given to marry Jehoshaphat's son Jehoram. Guess what happened after that? I mean, it's just generation for a period of time of wickedness. They gave their strength to women. Samson is not a king, but he gave his strength to a woman. So the first instruction, I think, is be careful and don't allow women what? To lead you astray from what you need to be as a king. It can destroy you. I don't know how many times in 30 plus years of preaching, I've heard somebody say to me, if he hadn't married what? That woman. Or if she hadn't married that man. Well, the reality is sometimes as strong as men like to think they are, guess who can turn them? A wife. A woman can turn them, and they become weaklings sometimes in the presence of a woman, and they can even lead them astray. So the first instruction, I think, in essence is this. Keep your eye and don't give your strength to women. If we were to word it another way, be careful who you marry and who you choose. We'll talk more about that in a minute. 4 to 7. What else should he do as king? Do not drink wine. Don't give yourself to wine. It's not for kings to do that. In fact, it seems to be a common problem among sometimes leaders. You see that in the Scriptures. Zimri, who was only king for 7 days, when he was overthrown by Omri, he was drinking himself drunk in the house, and that made him vulnerable. And so he only served as king for a period of 7 days in 1 Kings chapter 16. The book of Daniel chapter 5, do you remember what Belshazzar was doing when the kingdom fell to the Medes and the Persians? They were having a drinking party. They were out there just living it up and having a drinking party, and therefore they were vulnerable, and the Medes and the Persians buried in under the wall and easily defeated the Babylonian Empire, and that marked the end. That rulers sometimes in the Scriptures do not exercise judgment, and that they drink alcohol. What happens when one drinks alcohol that he points out here? Look at verse 5. They forget and they pervert justice of all the afflicted. In other words, because it affects their mind and their thinking, now they forget the law, they forget what they should do, they forget about justice. By the way, do you think that was a problem just in that day and time? No. It can be a problem in our day and time. I've got a preacher, I've held a meeting and worked with him before, but back in the 70s, he served as a page to a U.S. senator, and he tells that he observed at times where senators would come in to vote and their staff would have to tie, maybe with a rubber band, a Post-it note or something on their arm that said vote yes or no, because they were too drunk to know what they were doing. I mean, can you imagine somebody that's making laws of the land, right, that exercises that lack of self-control when they're in charge? And so she's telling her son, Lemuel, watch out, keep your eye on women, and choose wisely, and don't give yourself to alcohol, lest you drink and forget the law and pervert justice. In fact, verse 6 and verse 7, he says, give drink to him that's perishing, and wine to those who are bitter of heart. Let him drink and forget his poverty, and remember his misery no more. Now let me ask you a question. Do you think that Lemuel's mother is encouraging the use of alcohol, or the book of Proverbs is here in verse 6 and 7? No. Why not? Yeah. Really, I do think, come back to that. He's just simply stating a fact about why people drink. But I have to take into consideration everything else the Bible says. Proverbs 21, wine is a mocker, and strong drink is raging, and whoever is led astray thereby is not wise. Proverbs chapter 26, we saw the instruction about alcohol. I think here he's just simply stating the fact that sometimes people drink for what purpose? To forget their misery and their troubles. Now, it doesn't really work that way. At least it only works temporarily. But I think the point is, you are the king. What purpose do you have what? To drink. You're the one that's in what? Charge. You've got the wealth of the nation or the city at your disposal. It's as if the mother says, I can understand why somebody that is perishing or dying might use it to anesthetize themselves to what's going on or poverty, but it's not fit for somebody in your position. So she's not saying drinking is okay. She's just simply stating a fact of what it does, and saying you in reality have no reason why to engage in the drinking of alcohol. Then in verse 8 and 9, she tells him to open your mouth for the speechless and in the cause of all who are appointed to die. As a leader, what should he do? Look after the vulnerable. Is that what leaders always do? No. Oftentimes, who are the leaders looking out for? They look out for themselves or the powerful. And yet, as king, the mother saying, as king, you look out and you see that justice is done for those that do not have a voice. And that's those that are speechless. And you judge righteously, and you take care of the poor and the needy. That's what I'm telling you. So Lemuel is saying, I remember my mother's advice. And again, something that he's already serving as king. He's already, or at least he's going down the path to ruin. And his mother is coming to him and saying, son, what are you thinking? What now, my son? Straighten up. Start thinking about the kind of women you're associating with. Give up the drinking and treat people the right way, because you're not doing that right now. Whether that's the case or not, there's a lot of good advice in what Lemuel's mother passes on to him. But then we come to what is perhaps one of the most well-known sections in the book of Proverbs, and that is this section about the virtuous woman. What else do you have, other translations beside the word virtuous? Strong? Worthy woman? Excellent. This is a woman of strength. The word virtuous, this word that is translated virtuous, occurs many times in the Scriptures, and most often it is translated by the word army, because it describes, when you think about an army, you think about the strength of an army to defend and to protect. It is sometimes translated by the word strong. It is only translated virtuous in the New King James twice, once here in Proverbs 31 and verse 10, the other time in Ruth 3 and verse 11, when Ruth is described as a virtuous woman. But it really describes a woman of strength, of excellent character, of noble character. And the first thing he says about this woman is, if you find her, you've got somebody that's what? Her price is far above rubies. Most modern lexicographers and commentators think it's a reference to the pearl instead of the ruby. It really does not matter to me whether we put a pearl or a diamond or some other jewel that is mentioned there. The point is all the same, and that is, she is what? She is priceless. She's invaluable. And this might well, some believe, refer back to the point in time where when a daughter married, a dowry would be paid in order to secure her hand in marriage. And he's saying, when you found a woman like this, you found a woman who is absolutely invaluable. She is priceless. And he goes on from there to describe her character. And let's spend the rest of our time talking about the character of this woman here that is the virtuous woman. 11 to 12, she's somebody who her husband trusts. In what way does he trust her? Do you think it's talked about in this passage? Huh? Okay, in every way. So let's break that down a little bit then. In what ways? Certainly in every way, but that means when... She looks out for his best. Okay, he trusts that she's acting in his best interest, that she's taking care of things that need to be taken care of. I think probably particularly that's what he's talking about in this verse. When he's away, he trusts what? That she's faithful to him, that she's conducting herself with purity and with morality. We've got folks here that have been married for some time, and oftentimes when we're separated from our mates, and it's inevitable that happens, isn't it, at some point in time, that we're on a trip somewhere or in a meeting somewhere and they're somewhere else, and yet it never crosses one's mind that what? There's something untoward has happened, because there's complete and total trust in one that has this kind of character. I knew a man one time that had a wife that, and this was partly his fault, but obviously don't know when I describe it, but he would leave every morning to go to work, and the first thing he would do, this man, an older man in the congregation I preached, he would write down the mileage on her car. And he would come back and he would check the mileage to see whether or not she'd been anywhere. And if it was a day she had to grocery shop, he would mark the path out she was to take. And when she took a different path, you think that's the kind of marriage God expects people to have? No. When the marriage is what it needs to be, there's complete and there's total what? Trust between each other. So far as I knew in dealing with them, she'd never really done anything to cause that lack of trust. That was in his own paranoia that he felt that way. But my point is, there needs to be trust, and when both people have the character they need to have, there is that trust. One of the things he trusts is in verse 11, so he will have no lack of gain. What do you think that means? Okay, she manages things properly. She doesn't waste his money. Have you ever known somebody, I've heard people say this particularly sometimes can happen to many in the younger generation, I think it's probably happened to every generation, to be honest with you, where somebody says, well, we just don't have enough. Well, sometimes they don't have enough because why? It's misspent. It's mismanaged, and so it's all spent on luxury and other things, and then it comes down to it, and we don't have food on the table because there's not been managed correctly. But this virtuous woman, he has no lack of gain because he knows what? she's going to manage things in the proper way. In fact, she does him good all and not evil all the days of her life. We'll come back and talk a little bit more about her treatment of her husband. But her husband trusts her. He trusts her financially. He trusts her purity. There is a relationship here that is based upon mutual trust. I guess if there's one thing I would emphasize that is mentioned over and over again about this virtuous woman, and by the way, let me just mention this. I've got this written in the margin of my Bible. While the virtuous woman is far above rubies, not all wives are good things. Proverbs 18:22 and Proverbs 12 and verse 4 both mention that you're dealing with a contentious woman. It's what? It's better to live in the wilderness. It's better to live in the corner of a housetop than it is to live with an ungodly woman. So not all wives are blessings from God. Not all husbands are blessings from the Lord. But this woman here is a blessing, and one of the things that makes her a blessing is she's a worker. And that's characteristic of a virtuous woman. In fact, look at verse 13. What does she do? She seeks wool and flax and willingly works with her hand. She makes the material. What would that tell you about this woman? She takes care of her family. She's industrious, isn't she? She's industrious. In this particular case, not only is she seeking, does she make the clothing for her family, she seeks the wool and the flax, meaning she actually, before she makes the clothes, she has to make what? The material in order to make the clothes. In other words, by the way, this woman, this is one of the things that's interesting to me here. Let me see if I can find the verse. In verse 15, it mentions her maidservants. And so here's a woman that apparently, as she's described here, has servants, and yet she's not sitting back what? And taking things easy, but she's a hard worker. You might highlight this word in verse 13. She willingly works with her hands. What does that word willingly suggest to you? She wants to do it. She's motivated out of love for her family, out of her love for the Lord. She's not the kind of woman, and I wouldn't recommend this anyway, that you have to leave and send a list and say, this is what needs to be done. And, she's going to what? She's going to take care of it because she's working what? Willingly with her hands. She wants to be sure that things are done and done in the right way. So she's a worker. She's like a merchant ship. She brings her food from afar. I take that to mean probably that she's frugal and she looks for the best deal. In other words, this is a woman that when it comes to watching the money, she's going to look like a merchant ship that's out there, looking for the best merchandise to buy and the best deal on it. Because you want to. If you're a merchant, what do you want to do? You want to turn profit, right? So you're looking for the best deal for you. So if she's like a merchant ship, bringing her food from afar, she's looking for the best deal. She's frugal in her management of the food and the money. Verse 15. I want you to notice verse 15 in connection with that. Let me just drop down to verse 18. These are sort of bookends here. She rises while it is yet night. And then at the end of verse 18, what? Her lamp does not go out at night. What would we say about this woman? She works from daylight to dark. I've got here in the margin of my Bible, she's burning her candles at both ends. She's burning her candle at both ends. Gene Little wrote a statement in a book. I can't remember the title of the book. I've got this written in my margin as well. But we've all heard it. A man works from sun to sun, but a woman's work, what? Is never done. And so you see in this virtuous woman that she's a hard worker. She's burning her candle at both ends. She oftentimes, and some of us probably can look back and we remember particularly when we were children, mom is up when you get up. When you go to bed, what? She's still after. Whatever else she does, children and their knees don't quit, what? When the sun goes down. And so she's a hard worker. She's working and gets up early. She goes to bed late. She is providing food for her household and portion for her maidservants. She is sure that her family's needs are provided. Most men probably here would have to admit that if it was our responsibility to see that food was on the table and clothes were on the back of children, that they would be what?
Hungry and naked.
They'd be hungry and naked. In all likelihood. You know, they would, I can remember several times when our kids were little, somebody would say, maybe they want to get them something, they'd say, what size clothes do your kids wear? You know my answer would be? I don't know. I don't know. You know, that wasn't my department, you know. And so that's sort of the way that a lot of men are, that if it wasn't for the women that taking care of those things, they would not be provided. But she's sure that food is on the table. Now, does she engage in things sometimes outside her domestic responsibilities? Yeah. Look at verse 16. She considers a field and buys it in her spare time. She decides she's going to buy a field and plant it, and she profits from the planting that she does in verse 16. Verse 17, I don't have this marked here, but she takes care of herself. Why does she take care of herself? Yeah, she strengthens her arms. She girds herself with strength. She does that because that's necessary, what? For her to do the work. So she takes care of herself, that she has the strength to carry on that work. I've seen studies done that, you know, we live in a time where the sexes have sort of been blurred. Can't tell the difference in men and women. But I have seen studies done. And studies show, and looking at the difference in men and women, men, this is not surprising, have more brute strength than women have. I mean, physically. That's why when you see all the controversy, for example, about the sports issue, women cannot compete what? With men. That physically, the strength of men is just great. But you know what women have that men don't have? Endurance. They can work longer. They can keep going. And so that is necessary for them to do the work of being a mother, the work of being a wife. And so she takes care of herself, but she takes care of herself because she knows that's necessary for the work. She perceives that her merchandise is good. This is merchandise, I take, that she's making maybe to sell, to make a profit. I remember my grandmother when, I don't remember this much myself, but I remember being told about this. There was a time when she had health issues and medical bills came in, and so she monogrammed and she sewed and she sold in order to, you know, to try to help make some ends meet or get some bills paid off while my granddad was preaching. But the virtuous woman, in her merchandise, she perceives that it's good. I take that to mean the virtuous woman is concerned about quality. She does what in everything she does? She takes pride in it. She does her best in everything that she undertakes, in everything that she does. And so she's a hard worker, and she's doing her very best. Let's drop down to verse 19 before I go down to the verse 24. She stretches out her hand to the distaff, and her hand holds the spindle. What is the distaff? None of you women got your distaff and spindle out this week? The distaff referred to that which wool was wrapped around so that it could be put on the spindle and then made into usable material. And so it's a description here of the making of the material necessary to make these clothes that is being mentioned here. Holman Bible Dictionary said it is part of the spindle used in spinning wool. The obscure Hebrew word may refer to a small disc at the bottom of the spindle used to make the wheel spin faster. But whatever it was, it had to do with the spinning of the wheel, and her hand holds the spindle as she makes the material. Now, let me ask you this question. Does this mean that every virtuous woman has to have a distaff and a spindle and make clothes? No. We live in a different time than what people did back then. I can even remember my grandmother talking about they made most of the clothes that they wore. And I'm sure some here grew up in a time where that was done. Could somebody do that today? Yes, they could do that. By the way, if clothes keep getting briefer and briefer, we may have to start making our own clothes again. But the woman that watches the sales at JCPenney or goes to Dillard or somewhere else and watches for the best deal, and she sees that her family is clothed and that their needs are provided and that she's doing that in the most economical way. Is she a virtuous woman? Yeah, she doesn't have to go out and sew it herself. She doesn't have to go to Hobby Lobby or wherever else and buy fabric. But she sees that their needs are met, and she works hard in seeing that. So don't take that to mean that you have to literally make the clothes, but she sees their needs are taken care of and are provided for them. Let's drop down to verse 24. She makes the linen garments and sells them and supplies them for the merchants. And then in verse 27, she watches over the ways of her household and does not eat the bread of idleness. In other words, she sees that they're cared for. It mentions earlier over in verse 21. We'll come back to there in a minute about the not being afraid of cold weather. But what does it mean that she does not eat the bread of idleness? She's always going. How many of you, when you go back and you think about the memories of your mother, do you remember her just sitting around? Sitting up with her feet propped up, doing nothing. Now, are there women that could meet that character? Yes. But if we have fond memories of mothers or grandmothers or wives being virtuous women, you don't find them just sitting around doing nothing. You find them, even when they're sitting, they're probably what? They're sewing. They're mending. They're breaking beans. They're doing. It just seems like they never took any time what? Off. They were always, they don't eat the bread of idleness. Any comments on what is said in those verses there? But this woman, you might think, with all of her needs, with all that's on her plate, she would not have time for what? Look after the needy. You wouldn't think she has time because she's got children to take care of and a husband to see that he's taken care of, which sometimes is a bigger job than taking care of the children. And yet this woman that's a virtuous woman of high character, what else does she find time to do? She helps people. In verse, she extends her hand to the poor. Yes, she reaches out to the hands to the needy. Sometimes we can become self-centered people. We become so wrapped up in our own life, in our own responsibilities, we don't have time to think about others. I picture this woman, and I've known women like this. She's got food on the table for her children, but at the same time she's cooking food for her children. She's got a meal over here that's being prepared for somebody that's sick and needs something taken to them. She finds time to take somebody to the doctor, do other things such as that. That's one reason she's burning her candle at both ends. She sees that her family's needs are met. We've already mentioned this a little bit, but she's not afraid of snow for her household is clothed with scarlet. You look, and the winter's coming, it's turning cold, but you know what? She's ready. Because she's thought and she's planned what? She's planned ahead. That they're going to need a coat come wintertime. They're going to need clothes that are fit for the wintertime. And she sees that they are provided for them. She makes tapestry for herself, and her clothing is fine linen and purple. She sees that her needs are made. I think this probably also might suggest that she still cares about what? She cares about her appearance, doesn't she? That she's presented in a way that reflects on the husband, that presents herself in the very best way. The word modesty carries with it the idea certainly of not being exposing certain parts of our body, but when you look at the word that godly women adorn themselves in modest apparel, the word modest is the word cosmos that really means she's put together. In other words, she cares about her appearance because her appearance is what? It's a reflection on her family. It's a reflection upon her. And so she sees that her family's needs are taken care of and that they are met. She is, well, I mentioned this, I think I may have skipped this one earlier here, talking about the husband trusting her. Look at verse, let me go ahead and open this. Verse 23, it's listed there under the, sees that her family's needs are met. What about her husband? What impact does she have upon him? He is known in the gates when he sits among the elders of the land. What does that mean? Do what? She makes him look good. Are we a reflection on our mate? Sure we are. And we can either do that which brings them more respect and more honor, or we can live in a way that what? Destroys their impact and their reputation. By the way, to sit in the gate suggests that one is a leader in the nation. If you go to the book of Ruth, chapter 4 and verse 1, interesting, the virtuous woman is only woman specifically called virtuous in the scriptures is Ruth, but she's going to marry Boaz. Guess where Boaz is in Ruth 4 and verse 1? He's at the gate. He's an influential man. He's a man of influence. And the husband is able to sit in the gates, partly I think because of the character of his wife. I've got written out here in the margin of my Bible this, 1 Timothy 3:11 to 13. That's about elders' wives. Why would I put that there? Can a woman qualify or disqualify a man from serving? Sure. Yeah, you ever heard somebody say, because I've heard it said before about somebody, they'll say, well, you know what, I think he would make a good elder, but, and then what do they say? His wife. You know, she's lazy, she's a gossip, she's this, and so he's unqualified because his wife is a reflection of what? Of him and his ability to lead. And so a woman can disqualify him. We've seen that even in the political realm. Something can be uncovered about a spouse. It seems less now because character matters less than it's ever mattered to a lot of people. But you uncover something about the spouse, but they'll use that. Why? Because that's a reflection. But the husband here, his influence is impacted and aided by the character of his wife. Strength and honor are her clothing. She shall rejoice in verse 35 in time to come. What does it mean, strength and honor are her clothing? It's her characteristic. And when she opens her mouth, in verse 26, she is wise and speaks the law of kindness. What does that mean to you? Okay. She's... This is the kind of woman, by the way, and we could counter that in Proverbs 31, talking about the virtuous man, but she's the kind of woman, if we could open up the door to their home and sort of step into their home and just observe for a little bit, how would she talk to her husband? Would she be a nag? Would she be the contentious woman that's constantly what? No. She'd speak with him with... What about her children? We're going to find her when we open the door to the home, and I'm not talking about somebody that you know, has an isolated moment where they sort of lose their cool, but we're going to find her constantly yelling at her children, you know, degrading. No, she's going to speak wisely and she's going to speak kindly because she's a woman of character. You know, and so even though she's tired and she's been burning the candle at both ends, she still treats people with what? With respect and with kindness. And so she watches how she uses her tongue. Verse 28, her children rise up and call her blessed. What does that tell you? She's a good mother. She's what? She's respected. The children appreciate what she's done. I think the commentators are probably right, and I've got this again written in my margin, that this may mean mainly in adulthood. And I think they probably make a good point of that. How many times when you were 5 years old did you walk in and say, Mom, I just want you to let you know, I know all the hard work you're doing, you know, and I appreciate all of that. Probably in childhood, we often took things for granted. I know I would take for granted. I got up, there were biscuit and gravy and sausage and eggs on the table. When we came home from school, there was something to eat. When we sat down, we ate we didn't eat and I'm not disparaging this, we've eaten it a lot, but we didn't eat just a one-dish casserole. I mean, you know what I'm saying? Back then there was meat and 3 or 4 vegetables, and you had to have cornbread at my house, or something like that. I mean, and it was on the table what? Every night after night. We'd go to church on Sunday morning. We came home, there was roast in the crock pot that my mom would get up at 5:30 in the morning, put up. Well, we just sort of took that for granted. It's only when you get older a little bit and you start looking back that then you realize what? There's a lot of work that went into that. There was a lot of effort. And it's interesting that as we get older and we experience that, then we begin to say what? We were blessed. Look at what was done, And so I think that is a good point that sometimes the children praising is mainly done in adulthood, not so much at the moments when we are getting perhaps even the most benefit from that. Any comments on that? Her husband also, and he praises her. Why does he praise her? How does he praise her? Nobody has experience with that, I'm assuming. He honors her. He gives honor to the wife as unto the weaker vessel. That's passage in 1 Peter chapter 3 and verse 7. What man here thinks they probably tell their wife enough the value that they feel? Probably not a job that we do as well as we should, right? In other words, there's a lot of work, there's effort. You know, a husband comes home and he tells his wife, "What have you done all day long?" Well, that's the opposite of praise, isn't it? That's the opposite of letting her know the value that she feels. So he praises her, I think, to her. Let me just say, first of all, he lets her know what? That he appreciates and that she is valuable. That's 1 Peter chapter 3 and in verse 7. I think he also will praise her to others in all likelihood and brag on them. And that's not something that is overboard, but he lets others know. Got to be careful how you do that. My great-granddad one time, my grandmother, which I knew her more than I knew him. He died when I was, I think, 2 years old, a little over a year old. But he, one morning, they had visitors there that came and stayed the night. And they got up the next morning, and he'd been bragging about how she cooks breakfast, and they served the biscuits. And he said, "Ada," said, these biscuits aren't as good. So usually you make the best biscuits. They're so good. Said, but they're just a little bit off. Well, the lady that was visiting had made them that morning instead. And so that sort of backfired a little bit. You need to be sure you have all the facts before you start praising. But the point is, he was trying to let others know how well she did, and in the process insulted somebody else. But he needs to let others know. Many daughters have done well, but you excel them all. What does that mean? You're not the only virtuous. She's not the only virtuous woman. I think there are others that have done well. In fact, it wouldn't be necessarily be what we would do in this Bible class, but we could probably all share stories we know about virtuous women. But I think from the perspective of the husband, what is he saying? You're the best of the best. For me, you're what? You're the one I would pick. You know, others have done well, but you excel them all. You're the one for me, and for me, you have filled all of my needs, and you're the one I would pick what? Over and over and over again. As I've said before, one test I sometimes give people to test their marriage is to raise this question, and that is, if divorce for every cause was scriptural, would you still be married? Well, if our marriage is what God wants it to be, what would the answer be? Yes. I would pick you what? Over and over and over again. There was an old country song, I think it was Roy Clark that sang it, that if I had to do it all over again, I'd do it with you. You know, and that's the idea. He's saying, you're the one for me because of your character. Charm is beautiful, or is deceitful, and beauty is passing. What does that mean? Yeah. We're not always as... Our physical beauty is going to change. I think that's the point that is being made there. I don't care how well you take care of yourself. You know, sometimes you see celebrities. They try to have surgery and other things to stay looking young. Sometimes they end up just messing up how they look in the process of trying to maintain that youthful look. You know, unless you've been married a year or two, and sometimes it don't take that long. Chances are, when you look in the mirror, you look what? You look different than you did. Beauty fades. It changes over time. We're not always going to look the same. Our hair is going to turn gray. We're going to get a few more wrinkles than we used to have. But the woman who fears the Lord, she shall be praised. What does that mean? There is what we call the incorruptible beauty of the inward heart. 1 Peter chapter 3, 1 through 6. And that, what Peter's emphasizing there is the same thing this virtuous woman is being said by the virtuous woman. Put your emphasis on the inward character. Because that's a beauty that what? Doesn't change. You know, there's a reason why, a man that's been married 50 years or 60 years can look at his wife and say, you're as beautiful as the day what? The day I married you. Why does he say that? Because he's talking about usually what? Her character, the qualities that make her beautiful. That doesn't change. Now, physically, no doubt, he still finds her beautiful as well. But I think the point is, it's that inward character that doesn't change, that makes her so what? So attractive. And it doesn't matter what she looks like anymore, because that's not where his emphasis is at all. The one who fears the Lord shall be praised. Give her of the fruit of her hands, and let her own works praise her in the gates. Her works praise her. Does she need the covet the praise from her husband? Yes. But the work speaks for what? For herself. Her works praise her. When you see the result in the children and how they act and how they behave, that praises her. When you see the good that I think in the New Testament, I think about Dorcas, who there's a lot I don't know about Dorcas, but or Tabitha. But remember after she had died, and everybody's there, and they've got all the garments that she has worked so hard to make for her. The works spoke what? For themselves, and they praised her on that occasion. That's the virtuous woman. Who can find a virtuous woman? What does that answer imply? That question imply? They're a rarity. You know, not every woman meets these qualities. And the question, who can find a virtuous woman? Much like the questions that are asked elsewhere, like who can find a righteous man, or question like that in Scripture, they imply they are a rarity. And if it's a rarity and you find it, then what? You better take care of it. You better preserve it, and you better let her know the value that she has to you. Behind every man, what does they say? Is a surprise mother-in-law? No. Behind every man is what? Every successful man is what? A woman. You know. Behind that is that they oftentimes are the support and the encouragement that allows the man to accomplish what he did. That's the woman described here. So is it disconnected from Proverbs 31, 1-9? No, it's a continuation. Be careful about the kind of woman you choose. Well, what kind of woman should I choose? You look for this kind right here. And if she doesn't possess these qualities, then what? Then move on. Try to find somebody else. Anybody have anything to add to that? So, pick up your outline for next week, and we'll start. There's an introduction in there that also has a few questions on it, and go ahead and do chapter 1. And as I said, for those that want a digital copy, I can get it uploaded. You can download it to your device. You can print it at your house. But for everybody else, I'll try to have a copy made by next Sunday and get that bound. There we go. I knew it was getting close.